They said hand-me-downs were a kindness, until I learned what they were really handing me. That realization didn't arrive like lightning. It came slowly, the way shadows shift across a room when the sun moves just enough for you to notice something you should have seen long ago. For years, I told myself it was harmless. My sister-in-law would show up with bags of clothes she no longer wanted, shirts stretched thin at the collar, sweaters pilled from too many winters, jeans softened into someone else's shape. She'd smile like she was offering me treasure, and I'd smile back because I didn't want to make anything harder than it already was. It's strange how quietly a person can shrink without making a sound. I thought accepting her generosity made me easy, graceful, grateful. I thought it made the family smoother. I thought it was my role: blend in, stay low, cause no trouble. But one day, standing in my own closet, staring at 6 bags of clothes that weren't mine in any meaningful way, I felt something shift. Not loudly, not angrily, just honestly. This story isn't about fabric. It's about the weight of expectations no one ever says out loud. It's about how kindness can become a cage when you're afraid to name the truth. It's about choosing yourself in the smallest, quietest way and realizing it changes everything. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or ever accepted less because it seemed easier than speaking up, then stay with me. This story might feel a little like yours. And if you want more stories like this, raw, real, quietly powerful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. Claire held the tote like it was something delicate, though the cotton straps were already fraying. She straightened the handle twice before handing it to me, the way people do when they want you to notice the effort. Her smile hovered somewhere between polite and pleased with herself, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Thought this would look cute on you," she said. Cute. I took the bag because refusing would only stretch the moment, and the whole family was still milling around inside. The porch light above us buzzed faintly, hitting the top of her hair in warm yellow. I said thank you, because that's what you do, even though something in me tightened. She waved and walked back inside, like she'd just gifted me jewelry instead of whatever this was. I held the tote by the very tip of the strap, already sensing the heaviness of what waited inside. When I got to my car, I opened the bag. The first thing I saw was a sweater, beige, pilled and wrinkled, like it had spent a year at the bottom of someone's gym locker. I lifted it by the shoulders, and the fabric sagged in that defeated way old clothes do. My fingers brushed over a loose seam running down the side. The thread tugged slightly, like a pulled nerve. The faint scent of someone else's detergent clung to the knit, mixed with something older: heat, storage, time. I set the sweater across my lap and kept digging through the tote. Each piece felt like a tiny reminder that someone else had decided what should fit me, what should define me. I swallowed that thought before it got loud. Still, the bag rustled in my hands like an answer I wasn't ready to hear. I closed the tote gently, the way you close something you don't want to deal with yet. Claire's voice still echoed in my head, light, cheerful, oblivious. I forced a small smile as I stepped back inside to say goodbye to the rest of the family. "Thanks, I'll look through these later," I told her. The words tasted flat, but they were safe. She patted my arm like I'd just passed a minor test. "I knew you'd like them." I didn't correct her. I didn't want to turn a harmless gesture, if that's even what it was, into a scene. I've always been good at smoothing things over and making discomfort look polite. As I left, Claire was already pouring herself another drink, done with the moment entirely. I walked out holding the bag, the corners of my smile stiffening as soon as her back turned. Halfway home, I swung through a drive-thru, my version of first aid. A cold soda, too much ice, the kind that hits the back of your throat and makes the world feel manageable again. I parked in a quiet corner of the lot, letting the straw sit between my teeth. I snapped a picture of the tote resting beside me and sent it to my best friend. She gave me more old clothes. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then came back. "She means well," she wrote. I stared at the message for a long second. "Maybe," I typed back, though I wasn't convinced. The condensation from the cup pooled on the console. My fingers tapped the plastic rim, restless. I drove home slowly, giving myself time to breathe before walking into my own quiet. The screen door creaked when I pushed it open, just a small sound, but enough to break whatever calm I'd built in the car. A gust of fall air pushed past me, carrying that faint, musty smell from the tote as if the clothes themselves were stepping inside. I set the bag on the chair by the entryway. It slumped sideways, the fabric inside shifting like a tired exhale. For a moment, I just stood there, coat still on, keys in hand, staring at it. The house was warm, gentle, familiar. Yet that bag made the room feel smaller somehow, like I'd been reduced by a few inches. I hung up my keys, slipped off my shoes, and tried to shake it off, but the feeling lingered, thin, persistent, like a thread caught under a fingernail. The porch light flickered outside the window, soft, stretched, casting my shadow long across the floorboards. The shape of me tilted toward the bag, as if the two of us were tied together. I stood there for a moment longer, arms crossed, the quiet pressing around me. Nothing dramatic happened, no revelation, no sharp breath, just that slow, sinking awareness that something small had shifted. The tote sat exactly where I'd left it, innocent in its way, but my shadow beside it, it looked thinner than it should have been. I turned off the hallway light, leaving only the glow from the porch spilling faintly across the room. Me, the bag, and the quiet realization that this was only the beginning. Claire showed up again on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of hour when the neighborhood feels half awake and half bored. I heard her footsteps before I saw her, light, quick, purposeful. By the time I opened the door, she was already placing another tote on the mat. "I cleaned out my closet again," she said, brushing hair from her cheek as if the gesture required applause. "Thought of you right away." She didn't step inside. She didn't wait for me to invite her. She just smiled, nodded at her own generosity, and took 2 steps back like a performer finishing a small act. Before I could respond, she was already halfway to her car. The engine turned over and she drove away without a wave. I stood there holding the doorframe, watching dust lift under her tires, wondering how a simple bag could make a person feel so assigned. When I got home from work later that evening, the bag was still sitting exactly where she left it, centered, almost neatly, like a delivery someone meant me to sign for. The air smelled faintly of damp wood. Rain had swept through earlier, leaving the porch boards dark and swollen. I bent down and picked the bag up by its straps. It was heavier than the first, stuffed to its limits. A sleeve of something, maybe a cardigan, poked out the top like it was trying to escape. The street was quiet. The leaves stuck to the walkway. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Carrying the bag inside felt like carrying a chore. Or a message. I wasn't sure which. At work the next morning, Lily eyed my outfit before I even made it to my desk. She has that soft, worried expression that always makes me wish the world were gentler than it is. "You look different today," she said. "Is that new?" I laughed under my breath. "No, just something my sister-in-law gave me." Her eyebrows rose the way people's do when they don't want to judge, but accidentally do anyway. "You okay?" she asked. I shrugged, adjusting the collar that never sat quite right. "It's fine." But the truth was simple. I felt like I was wearing someone else's story, one they'd already finished and discarded. That evening I took the dog for a walk around the cul-de-sac, letting him tug me from mailbox to mailbox. The sun was low, spilling thin light across the pavement. Mrs. Gardner, the elderly neighbor who always wears house slippers outside, was trimming her rose bushes. She looked up when I passed. "That's a heavy-looking bag you've got there yesterday," she said casually, clipping a thorny stem. I told her Claire had given me more clothes. She hummed softly, in that knowing way older women have. Honey, people give things for all sorts of reasons. Doesn't mean the reasons are about you. I smiled politely and kept walking, but her words settled inside me like dust, light, but impossible to ignore. Later that night, I tried on one of the tops from the second bag. It looked normal enough on the hanger, basic, simple, nothing offensive. But as soon as I slipped it on, something felt off. It wasn't the size. It wasn't even the color. It was the feeling. Like stepping into a version of myself that someone else had decided. I stood in front of the mirror longer than I intended, tilting my head, pulling at the hem, trying to convince myself it worked. But the reflection wasn't me. I took it off slowly, folding it with care I didn't actually feel, and placed it on the bed beside the others. By the time I put everything away, the corner of my closet was starting to look like a small museum of other people's choices. I stacked the clothes neatly, pretending organization could make the discomfort disappear. But the quiet truth pressed against me. Every new bag felt like a subtle shrinking. A reminder that accepting too much from someone can make you smaller without you noticing. I closed the closet door and leaned my forehead against it for a moment. No one said anything out loud. No confrontation, no drama. Just that slow, steady erosion. The kind you only recognize when it's already settled into the walls of your life. My brother let something slip one evening while we were sitting at his kitchen table, eating reheated leftovers like when we were kids. Claire was out running errands, her absence filling the room more than her presence usually did. He rubbed the back of his neck, sighed, and said, "She's been trying to save more lately. She hates spending money, says it stresses her out." He didn't look at me when he said it. It wasn't meant as a warning, but it landed like one. The implication sat between us, soft, heavy, and unspoken. The clothes weren't generosity. They were redistribution. A cost-cutting measure wrapped in politeness. I stirred my fork through the cold noodles, pretending the thought didn't sting more than it should. But it did. While he was getting us water, I glanced toward the counter. A stack of unopened bills lay under a chipped ceramic mug. Electric, gas, insurance. Each one stamped with red reminders, bold enough to shout even without sound. A few had notes in Claire's handwriting. Over limit. Fix this. Cut down. I traced the edge of one envelope with my eyes. It didn't take much imagination to understand why Claire was trimming their expenses with such precision. When my brother returned, he caught my gaze lingering, but didn't comment. He sat down, handed me a glass, and told a small joke to shift the air. I laughed, but the image of those red markings stayed with me long after the punchline faded. The next time I saw Claire, she made a remark that wasn't quite sharp, but wasn't soft either. "You've always had that simple, vintage vibe," she said, holding up a faded t-shirt from her latest donation. "Classic suits you." Classic. Simple. Vintage. None of those meant what she pretended they meant. I managed a small smile. "If you say so." She nodded, pleased with herself, and folded the shirt like she was presenting something thoughtful. I took it with both hands, part habit, part reflex. But inside, something tightened. Compliments shouldn't feel like cages. As she walked away, her words clung to me more tightly than the fabric ever would. On the drive home, I kept replaying her tone, the lightness, the casual authority, the way her voice slid just beneath the line of condescension. Maybe she didn't mean to put me in a smaller box, but she definitely wasn't trying to take me out of one. I parked in my driveway and sat there for a moment, engine ticking softly as it cooled. The truth threaded itself through my thoughts. Claire didn't see the clothes as gifts. She saw them as solutions. And somehow, I had become the problem those solutions were designed for. It was a quiet kind of realization, but it landed with the weight of something I could no longer ignore. When I finally walked inside, The smell of old coffee lingered in the kitchen, my morning cup abandoned halfway through. I reheated it out of habit, even though reheated coffee always tastes like regret. As it warmed, I leaned against the counter, the earlier conversation circling me like steam. I wasn't angry. Not exactly, just dulled. The kind of feeling that comes when your self-worth has been tapped so gently, so repeatedly, you barely notice the bruises forming. I poured the coffee into a mug and took a sip. It was bitter in a way that wasn't about the coffee at all. Later that night, I folded the new clothes Claire had given me. Each piece carried some reminder: a stretched neckline, a faded label, a tiny stain only visible under the kitchen light. I stacked them neatly anyway, pretending order could calm the unease. But my hands paused over the last shirt. A breath caught in my throat, light but sharp. This wasn't generosity. This was a system, a rhythm I had accepted without ever asking why. I pressed the clothes into a tidy pile and closed the drawer with more force than necessary. The sound echoed through the quiet room, final in a way I didn't expect. It happened at a small family gathering, one of those casual weekend things where everyone brings a dish, and conversations float between rooms like wandering bees. Claire arrived late, carrying a tote bag with the same confidence someone might carry a birthday cake. "Oh, I brought something for her," she said loud enough for the room to hear. Before I could protest, she lifted the bag and handed it to me like we were on stage. I don't wear these anymore, but she loves this kind of stuff. A few aunts looked over, smiling politely. My cheeks warmed, not with gratitude. I held the bag gingerly, the way one holds something too public, too exposed, wishing the moment didn't feel so performative. Someone encouraged me to look inside. Good-natured teasing, nothing malicious. I obliged, pulling out the first item. A blouse whose fabric had thinned from wear, the collar already graying around the edges. The sunlight from the big front window streamed directly onto it, highlighting every flaw, every frayed spot. I felt the room watching, not with cruelty, but with a curiosity that made my stomach twist. Claire stood beside me, arms crossed lightly. "It's still cute, right?" I forced a smile. "Sure." But the fabric between my fingers felt tired, worn down in a way I suddenly recognized in myself. A cousin laughed quietly. "It matches her style. Simple, you know?" Simple. Again. Another aunt chimed in. "She's always had that humble, easygoing vibe. Not everyone can pull it off." The comments came wrapped in sweetness, but the edges were sharp. I kept my expression calm, my voice steady. "Thank you," I said to no one in particular, as if politeness could buffer the sting. Claire looked pleased, which somehow made everything worse. The room hummed with soft chatter, but a thin embarrassment settled over me like a shawl I hadn't asked to wear. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, needing a pocket of air untouched by observation. I leaned one shoulder against the wall, letting the muffled laughter seep through. The embarrassment wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet tightening, like someone quietly cinching a belt around my ribs. For the first time, I wondered if this wasn't about generosity at all. Maybe it was about shaping me, boxing me into something contained, predictable, harmless. That thought settled with a heaviness I wasn't prepared for. I straightened up, inhaled, and practiced a steady face before walking back into the living room. The sunlight had shifted by the time I returned, hitting the pile of clothes in the tote and washing them in a hard, bright white. The kind of light that reveals everything you hoped might stay hidden. I sat down, listening to the clinking of utensils and the soft hum of conversations blending. Someone asked if I liked the blouse. "It's fine," I said, because it was easier than unpacking the truth. But inside, something deeper stirred. A dull ache, but not the kind that wounds, the kind that wakes. I placed the blouse back into the tote and set it on the floor beside my chair. The sun caught on its worn collar again, almost accusingly. No one noticed, or maybe no one cared. But I felt a thin line draw itself inside me. Quiet, faint, but unmistakably there. A line between who I was expected to be and who I actually was. The room continued around me, warm and ordinary, as I sat perfectly still, letting the moment etch itself in my mind with the clarity of bright light on frayed fabric. The following week, I decided to wear one of Claire's blouses to work, more out of resignation than enthusiasm. It was a pale blue thing with stiff fabric that scratched lightly at my neck every time I moved. Still, I ironed it carefully, hoping effort might soften the feeling of wearing something that wasn't mine. When I stepped into the office, the air conditioning hit the fabric, making it feel even rougher. I tried to ignore it, smoothing the front with a palm as I walked to my desk. No one said anything at first, but that didn't make the unease any quieter. My collar kept catching on my skin, a reminder with every breath that I was wearing an identity handed to me by someone else. It didn't take long for Lily to notice. She leaned over the divider between our desks, studying the blouse with a half smile. "That's from a few seasons ago, right?" Her tone wasn't cruel, just curious, the kind of curiosity that still manages to sting. I glanced down at myself, suddenly aware of every outdated detail. "Probably," I muttered, tugging at the stiff hem. Lily gave an apologetic smile, and I tried to mirror it, but her words clung to me like lint, impossible to brush off. She didn't mean anything by it, I knew that, but the moment carved a small notch in my confidence, one I hadn't expected. When another coworker complimented my retro vibe, I felt something fold inward. I heard myself saying, "I like vintage styles," even though the lie sat heavy in my throat. I wasn't defending the blouse. I was defending the illusion that I had chosen it. As the morning dragged on, I kept smoothing the fabric, forcing myself to tolerate its stiffness. The tag at the neckline scratched me every time I moved, gentle, persistent, impossible to forget. By lunchtime, I had rehearsed a dozen different ways to shrug off the comments, but none made me feel any less exposed. In the break room, I stared at my reflection in the dark microwave door, distorted, softened at the edges. I didn't look bad. That was the strange part. I looked diminished, like someone who had agreed to be smaller without ever being asked directly. A quiet frustration rose in me, slow but unmistakable. It wasn't fury. It wasn't even sadness. It was the awareness of something being eroded, by inches, not blows. I tossed my coffee cup and told myself I was overreacting, but the tightness in my chest disagreed, pulsing steadily beneath my ribs. On the way home, I stopped at the supermarket. The clothing aisle was lit with soft fluorescents, the kind that make everything look more hopeful than it actually is. I ran my fingers along a rack of discounted sweaters, new, untouched, still holding their shape. I almost bought one. Almost. But the price tag made me hesitate. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because wearing something new felt like wanting too much. That hesitation told me more about myself than the sweaters did. I walked out with nothing but a loaf of bread and a strange heaviness in my chest. The moment I got home, I unbuttoned the blouse before the door even closed behind me. The fabric tugged roughly as I peeled it off, leaving a faint red line across my collarbone. I dropped it onto the nearest chair, not bothering to fold it this time. The house was quiet, but not comforting. I stood there, fingers pressed to the irritated skin on my neck, feeling an ache that had nothing to do with fabric. It was small, sharp, a reminder that even the gentlest forms of disrespect, when repeated often enough, can bruise. And I was finally starting to feel the bruise. I hung the blouse on a wire hanger out of habit, even though it didn't deserve the courtesy. As I lifted it toward the closet rod, the hanger slipped from my fingers and clattered to the hardwood floor. The sound was sharp, out of place in the stillness of the house. I stared at the fallen hanger for a moment, surprised at how quickly irritation rose in me. Sudden, warm, uninvited. Bending down, I picked it up again, my fingers brushing over the cold metal. Something about the small accident felt symbolic, though I couldn't articulate why. I tried again, slower this time, forcing the blouse onto the hanger with a patience I didn't feel. As I reached to smooth the fabric, I noticed a faint ink stain on the underside of the sleeve. Small, almost invisible, but unmistakably there. I held the sleeve closer to the light. The stain had bled into the fibers long ago, making its mark permanent. It made me wonder how many imperfections Claire noticed before giving it to me, and how many she simply decided were good enough for someone like me. The thought stung more than I wanted to admit. I let the sleeve fall back into place, suddenly tired of pretending these details didn't matter. A soft glow slipped across the closet floor as I stepped back. The porch light outside flickered for a moment, sending a thin beam through the narrow gap at the bottom of the door. It brushed against the row of clothes hanging there, soft, tired colors that didn't reflect me so much as they reflected someone's idea of who I should be. I stood there, watching the glow dance and then settle, illuminating the clutter of fabric I had been accumulating for months. Something about that brief wash of light made it impossible to keep lying to myself. I felt it then, a quiet push inside my chest, subtle but steady, like a whisper telling me that I had allowed too much for too long. These clothes weren't just fabric. They were assumptions, boundaries crossed, identity chipped away piece by piece. The realization didn't bring anger. It brought clarity, a small, steady kind that sits behind the ribs and makes breathing feel different. I touched the edge of the blouse again, feeling a line form inside me, thin but unmistakable. Even the softest disrespect can accumulate into something unmistakably heavy. I pulled the blouse off the hanger, folding it slowly this time, deliberate, careful, not out of reverence but out of choice. Then I set it inside a separate tote bag, one I kept for donations I planned to make someday, but never had the courage to follow through on. The fabric slumped into the bottom, like it finally belonged somewhere honest. I stared at the tote for a long moment, letting the weight of the small decision settle. It wasn't rebellion, not yet, but it was a beginning. The porch light flickered one last time before steadying, leaving the room dimmer than before. I closed the closet door gently, the click sounding softer than usual, almost tentative. The air felt different on my skin, lighter in a way that didn't make sense for such a small action. But small shifts have a way of marking turning points long before we name them. I turned off the hallway light and walked toward the living room, leaving the folded blouse behind me in the tote, undramatic and final in its quiet new place. It happened during a weekend gathering at my parents' house. People moved in and out of the kitchen, balancing plates and refilling drinks, conversations overlapping like soft static. I was rinsing dishes at the sink when Claire's voice floated in from the dining room, clear, casual, unaware of the thinness of the wall between us. "She practically lights up every time I give her something," she said. "You'd think I handed her gold." A few chuckles followed, low and familiar. I froze with my hands in warm, soapy water, a plate half submerged. My pulse didn't spike. My breath didn't hitch. Instead, something inside me went quiet. So quiet it felt like a small room sealing shut. The laughter didn't stop. It rolled around the table like silverware clinking against plates. Not cruel, but careless enough to burn. Someone added, "Well, she's always been appreciative." Appreciative, as if gratitude were my defining trait, as if my acceptance of unwanted things was a personality, rather than a boundary I didn't know how to set. I could almost picture their expressions, light amusement, heads tilted, not a single one thinking their comments might land like stones in someone else's chest. The sink water cooled around my fingers, grounding and heavy. I dried my hands slowly, buying myself a few seconds. My legs felt stiff as I walked down the hallway toward the bathroom, each step careful, deliberate. Inside, I closed the door with a soft click and leaned toward the mirror. My reflection looked startled, not wide-eyed, not visibly shaken, just hollowed in a way I hadn't seen before. I touched my cheek, then my jaw, as if confirming I was still there. A quiet pressure expanded in my chest, not sharp enough to hurt, but dense enough to make breathing feel shallow. I pressed both hands against the sink and let the truth settle. That was how they saw me. Standing under the pale bathroom light, I replayed their voices, each word falling into place, forming a picture I'd avoided looking at for months. This wasn't kindness sprinkled with awkwardness. This was condescension dressed as generosity. And I had accepted it, smiling, saying thank you, making myself smaller so everyone else could stay comfortable. The realization cut through me cleanly, not like a wound, but like a curtain being pulled aside. I wasn't angry yet. I was awake. And that, somehow, felt more dangerous. I splashed water on my face, letting the chill pull me back into my body. The tile floor beneath my feet was cool, grounding me as my thoughts steadied. I dried my skin with a hand towel, noticing how my fingers trembled, not from shock, but from a clarity I hadn't expected to feel. Their voices still lingered in the back of my mind, but they sounded different now, less authoritative, more revealing. They hadn't exposed me, they'd exposed themselves. And the gap between who I was and who they assumed me to be suddenly felt too wide to ignore. When I stepped out of the bathroom, the house felt louder, brighter, almost intrusive. But something in me had shifted, subtle but unmistakable, like stepping onto steadier ground after months of walking on sand. I walked past the dining room without looking in, my face composed, my breath even. No one noticed the change. No one noticed me at all. But that was fine. I didn't need witnesses for this moment. I felt the shift inside me, quiet, steady, final in its own small way. Some truths don't crash in. They land softly. And once they settle, nothing stays the same. I drove home that night with the windows cracked just enough for the cold air to sting my cheeks. The radio was off. Even the sound of the tires felt too loud. I rested one hand on the gear shift, the other loose on the wheel, letting the silence wrap around me like something I needed to sit with. The streetlights passed in slow intervals, cutting the dark into manageable pieces. I kept replaying Claire's voice in my mind, but the anger I expected never came. Only a hollow kind of disbelief. At a red light, I breathed in deeply. The car smelled faintly of the old clothes in the back seat, detergent mixed with time, an echo of all the things I kept letting slide. When I got home, I carried the latest bag inside and dropped it on the floor with a dull thud. I knelt down and opened it, pulling out each item one by one, faded, stretched, thinning, every color muted, every piece telling the same story. It wasn't that the clothes were ruined, they just had nothing left to give. And for the first time, I felt the weight of that truth settle inside me. I tugged at a sleeve, watching dust rise under the hallway light. The fabric sagged, tired in the way that mirrored how I suddenly felt about the entire situation. I sat back on my heels, letting the quiet press around me. The floor was cold through my jeans as I leaned against the wall, staring at the open bag. I didn't cry. I didn't even frown. I just sat there, suspended in the strange space between acceptance and exhaustion. "How long have I let this happen?" I whispered, though the house didn't need the question voiced to know the answer. A small ache pulsed behind my ribs, not sharp, not dramatic, just steady enough to remind me I was still human. My fingers brushed the frayed edge of one of the shirts, and for a moment, it felt like touching an old bruise I'd forgotten existed. I exhaled slowly, the breath shaky but freeing. My phone buzzed once, then again, and a third time. I didn't move. The vibration hummed across the hardwood floor like something alive, demanding attention. I glanced at the screen. My brother's name glowed softly, his call breaking the silence and yet somehow adding to it. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't have the energy to pretend everything was fine. The phone buzzed again, shorter this time, like it was giving up. I let it ring out, my head resting back against the wall. My shoulders felt heavy, as if every unspoken frustration had finally gathered there. I rolled them slightly, trying to release the tension, but it clung stubbornly. I picked up one of the shirts and turned it over in my hands. A tiny tear near the hem caught my attention. One stitch pulled loose, another threatening to follow. It reminded me of something I hadn't realized until now. Small damage grows quietly. People assume it doesn't matter if they don't look closely, but I saw it now. Every pulled thread, every slight, every quiet dismissal that had been disguised as kindness, and I couldn't unsee it. The phone buzzed one last time, a long vibration, then stillness. The house settled into silence again, deep and undisturbed. I set the shirt down beside me and pulled my knees to my chest, resting my chin on top. I felt empty, but not lost. More like a tide had finally gone out, leaving space for something honest to take its place. The quiet wasn't comforting, but it wasn't frightening either. It was simply the truth, sitting beside me on the floor, patient and unavoidable. The next morning, I tried to convince myself to fold the clothes neatly, to put them away like I always did. Habit has a way of softening the edges of things we shouldn't tolerate. I spread the first shirt across my lap and smoothed the wrinkles with both hands. My fingertips moved slowly, tracing each seam, but something in me resisted. I picked up another shirt, hesitated, then set it down again. My hands didn't want to obey the old routine anymore. Each piece of fabric felt heavier than it should, like it carried the weight of every unspoken slight tucked into its fibers. The quiet in the room was thick, almost watchful, as if waiting to see what I would do next. I placed my palms on the pile and closed my eyes. "Why am I only ever receiving?" I whispered into the stillness. Not gifts, not kindness, just leftovers dressed as generosity. The question didn't come from bitterness, it came from clarity. A clarity that had been building, thread by thread, until it finally formed something I could no longer ignore. When I opened my eyes again, the shirts looked different. Not worse, just honest. I let out a slow breath, the kind that feels like it's been waiting months to escape. My phone buzzed with a message from Lily. "Thinking of you. You deserve better." Simple words, soft, but they landed with more force than anything Claire had ever handed me. I stared at the message for a long moment, rereading it until my chest loosened a little. Deserve better. I wasn't used to thinking of myself that way, worthy of something uncreased, unbroken, chosen. I typed back a small thank you, then set my phone face down, letting the warmth of her care settle quietly inside me. It was a small reminder that someone saw me clearly. I stood and walked to the closet, pulling it open with more force than I intended. The hinges groaned softly. The hangers inside shifted, creating a low scraping sound that felt strangely fitting. I looked at the row of clothes, not just Claire's, but everything I had kept out of politeness or habit. A small spark of defiance stirred in my chest, steady and warm. Not anger, just a beginning. My fingers brushed against a hanger, pushing it aside, the metal scraping gently against the rod like a quiet protest made of sound instead of words. I gathered the clothes from the bed, folding some, tossing others onto a growing pile near the corner. Each time I set a piece aside, my heartbeat steadied a little, as if my body was finally catching up to what my mind already understood. I didn't owe anyone gratitude for things that made me feel smaller. Not anymore. The room felt different. Not lighter exactly, but clearer. I moved deliberately, almost methodically, sorting through the layers of old fabric and older expectations. By the time I stepped back, my breathing felt less tangled. When I slid the closet door shut, it thudded softly, the sound more decisive than I expected. The pile of clothes I'd set aside sat quietly in the corner, unassuming yet powerful in what it represented. I looked at it for a moment, hands resting on my hips, feeling a thin line of resolve settle inside me. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was the first boundary I'd drawn in a long time, even if no one else knew it yet. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest rise of my own voice. Quiet, but mine. The next morning, I cracked the window open to let in the cool air. As I reached for the blinds, a warm glow washed across the floor. Soft at first, then more insistent. The porch light outside had stayed on longer than usual, and its brightness poured through the glass like a slow tide of gold. It stretched across the floorboards, reaching the open closet, as if it knew exactly where to go. I stood there for a moment, watching the light claim the room with a quiet authority. It felt strangely deliberate, like the universe tapping me on the shoulder, telling me to pay attention. The glow hit the pile of clothes I'd set aside the night before, catching threads and seams I'd never noticed under softer light. Every fray looked sharper, every faded tone looked more revealing. For a brief second, I felt a pinch of guilt, like I'd betrayed the ritual Claire and I had silently upheld. But the guilt didn't stay. The longer I looked, the more the light stripped away the illusion that these clothes were anything but someone else's cast-offs. The truth wasn't harsh, it was simply undeniable. A heaviness settled in my chest, not from sadness, but from clarity. It was the kind of clarity that makes you want to look away, even though you know you shouldn't. I stepped closer and reached down, lifting one of the shirts. The sunlight hit it directly, illuminating every flaw. The stretched neckline, the faint yellowing near the armpit, the tiny snags that formed a constellation of neglect. How did I pretend this was kindness? I whispered to no one. The shirt hung limp in my hand, an answer I already understood. It wasn't about the shirt, it was about me. I folded the shirt carefully, not out of respect for it, but out of respect for myself. Then I reached for another, and another, stacking them with a steadiness I didn't know I had. Not one piece made me hesitate. Not a single thread felt worth keeping. I realized then how much I'd been avoiding the truth. Accepting these clothes wasn't humility. It was permission. Permission for Claire to see me as someone who should be grateful for what she no longer needed. I felt the recognition settle deep, firm as a boundary finally taking shape. By the time I had finished sorting, one tote was full, packed neatly with the clothes I never truly chose. I grabbed the handles and set the bag near the door. The fabric inside slumped gently, like it was relieved to be claimed by a purpose that made sense. Standing there, I inhaled deeply. The air felt cleaner somehow, as if removing even one layer of someone else's assumptions had given the room permission to breathe. I looked around my home, the walls, the floor, the quiet corners, and felt a shift I couldn't yet name, but could feel in my bones. The morning light began to soften, fading into the usual rhythm of the day. But the decision I'd made didn't fade with it. It stayed sharp, steady. I pressed my palm against the tote by the door, letting its weight anchor me. I wasn't ready to confront Claire. Not yet. But I was ready to start reclaiming the small pieces of myself I had been giving away without realizing it. As I turned to leave the room, the light brushed against my shoulder, a quiet reminder that once seen, the truth can't be unseen. During my lunch break the next day, I sat with Lily at a small table tucked against the wall of the cafe across from our office. The place smelled like toasted bread and oversteeped tea, the kind of scent that usually felt comforting. She watched me stir my drink long after the sugar had dissolved. "You sure you're okay?" she asked gently. Her voice wasn't probing. It was a soft knock on a closed door. I nodded, though the weight on my chest said otherwise. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, letting the heat seep into my palms, grounding me in a way words couldn't. I wanted to tell her everything, but all that came out was a quiet, "I'll be fine." The steam from the tea rose slowly, curling upward like it had nowhere urgent to be. I watched it drift, thinking about how many times I had brushed off my own feelings with the same lazy swirl. Lily waited, patient in a way that made her presence feel like a soft blanket draped over my shoulders. "You don't have to pretend with me," she said. I took a sip of the tea, too hot, sharp against my tongue. "I'm not pretending," I said, though even I could hear the wobble in the lie. My reflection shivered faintly on the silver lid of the sugar jar, blurred and small. After a long silence, I exhaled. "I think I've just been putting up with things for too long," I admitted, staring at the ring of condensation on the table. Lily tilted her head, concern softening her features. "You've always taken care of everyone else," she said, "but that doesn't mean they get to decide who you are." Her words hit me in a place I didn't know was tender. I let them sit there between us, sinking in slowly, soaking into the tired parts of me. It wasn't advice, it was recognition. I rubbed my thumb against the ceramic mug, feeling the tiny chip along the rim, a flaw only noticeable if you touched it. "That's the thing," I said quietly. "I've gotten used to being manageable." Lily didn't argue, didn't soften it. She simply nodded. "Doesn't mean you have to stay that way," she replied. Her tone wasn't fierce, but steady enough to lean on. For a moment, I felt something inside me loosen, like a knot that had been slowly pulled tight over months finally easing its grip. The cafe noise faded into background static, and the world felt still. On the walk back to the office, the wind caught my hair and whipped it lightly across my cheek. I tucked it behind my ear, still thinking about the conversation. Inside the building, everything looked the same. The rows of desks, the quiet hum of computers, the muted colors. But I felt a strange distance from it all. Almost like I was stepping back into a life I'd been watching more than living. My shoulders sank as I reached my desk, exhaustion slipping over me like a thin, familiar blanket. I wasn't falling apart, but I was tired, bone tired, from holding myself together in quiet ways no one ever saw. When I got home that evening, I stood in front of my closet with the door half open, staring at the rows of clothes. For the first time, they didn't just feel like fabric. They felt like a burden I had been dragging behind me, a reminder of how much I had absorbed without question. I touched one of the hangers lightly, listening as it tapped against the bar. Small, hollow, almost like a sigh. I stepped back, letting the door fall shut on its own. In that moment, I recognized something simple but undeniable. This wasn't just about clothes. It was about every part of me that had been set aside for someone else's comfort. That night, the house was so still I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I walked to my closet, fingers brushing lightly along the wall as if steadying myself. When I pulled the door open, the hinges gave a soft groan, a small, tired sound that matched how I felt. I stepped closer and reached up, throwing the closet doors wide. The shift of air stirred the clothes inside, making them sway gently, like they were bracing for what I might decide. The shelves, the rods, the tucked-away corners, all of it felt like a quiet archive of the things I'd tolerated. "Enough," I finally whispered, the words small but clear. It felt like cracking a window after months of stale air. 6 bags sat crowded together at the bottom of the closet, some zipped, some half open, some slumped as if collapsing under the weight of the months they represented. Each one marked a different moment, a holiday, a casual visit, a gathering where Claire smiled too wide as she handed me her cast-offs. Together, they looked like a history of being underestimated. I crouched down, touching the first bag. The nylon was cold, the handles rough against my fingers. My breath steadied. I saw the whole picture then. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, but deeply familiar. I had been shrinking myself to fit into someone else's idea of generosity, and I was finally tired of the fit. I dragged the first bag out into the middle of the room. The sound of the fabric scraping against the wooden floor echoed faintly, like a small announcement. One by one, I pulled out the clothes. Shirts with stretched hems, pants with thinning knees, sweaters whose colors had dulled into resignation. They spilled out around me like a timeline I'd never chosen. I placed my hand on the pile. "This ends here," I murmured, not out of anger, but relief. It was the first time I had spoken those words aloud, and they didn't feel dramatic. They felt overdue. A strange calm settled over me as I sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through each piece with quiet precision. I wasn't sentimental. I wasn't conflicted. I was simply honest with myself in a way I hadn't been for a long time. For every shirt I folded, I felt a little more space returned to my chest. For every sweater I set aside, I felt a little less weight pressing against my ribs. It was a slow, methodical reclaiming, gentle but firm, the way sunlight softens a room without asking permission. When I stood up, a small mountain of clothes waited beside me, ready for a new destination. The bag sagged slightly under the weight of everything I had allowed into my life without question. I tightened the handles, my fingers curling around them with steadier resolve. The house felt dimmer now, but not in a way that frightened me. The dimness felt honest, like the truth settling into the corners after hiding for too long. I carried the bag to the entryway and set it down beside the door. It didn't look like surrender. It looked like closure beginning to take shape. As I stepped back, my foot brushed against another bag still waiting inside the closet. I looked at it for a moment, letting its presence sit with me. There was more work to do, more unspoken weight to release, more quiet truths to face. But I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt ready. The room was silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. One that didn't swallow me. One that made space for movement. I took a slow breath, feeling the shift inside me settle like a soft click. Tomorrow I would deal with the rest. Tonight, I had taken the first real step. The next evening I sat on the floor again, this time with the closet emptied halfway, and the room scattered with the pieces of a story I no longer wanted to tell. I lifted an old cardigan from one of the bags, the yarn worn thin, the cuffs stretched from years of someone else's use. As I turned it over in my hands, flashes of memory surfaced. Every moment Claire had smiled as she passed another item to me. Every time I'd accepted it with a soft laugh to keep the peace. I placed the cardigan beside me. Then another piece. and another. A slow, steady inventory of every small surrender I'd normalized. The pile grew, and with it, the understanding that none of this had ever been harmless. Near the bottom of one bag, I found a blouse I hadn't seen in months. White, with a faint smear of old makeup near the collar, so subtle I'd missed it before. I held it up to the lamp. The stain caught the light in a way that made my stomach clench. It wasn't the stain itself. It was what it represented. How often I'd accepted things that weren't clean, weren't cared for, weren't meant for me. Memories flickered. Claire handing me this exact blouse at a family gathering, her smile radiant as she told everyone how grateful I always was. The humiliation I hadn't allowed myself to feel back then finally surfaced now, softened only by the fact that I could finally see it for what it was. Disregard disguised as benevolence. I lowered myself onto the floor, legs folding beneath me. The wood felt cool through my sweatpants, grounding me as my thoughts settled into something sharp but calm. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt awake. Not the loud, fiery kind of awakening. The quiet kind that settles behind the eyes, making everything clearer than before. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my pulse steadier than expected. This isn't who I am, I murmured to the empty room. The words didn't shake. They sounded like truth, spoken plainly, finally free of apology. As I gathered the clothes into one large bag, a steady rhythm formed. Fold, place, zip. Almost meditative. There was no anger in my movements, no frantic tearing or dramatic gestures, just intention. For each piece I packed away, another layer of discomfort fell from my shoulders. The bag grew heavier, but I felt lighter. It struck me then how many moments of hurt I had brushed aside, simply to avoid conflict. How many times I had accepted being reduced to something simple or grateful. The realization wasn't painful. It was freeing, like a window cracking open after a long winter. When the bag was full, I pulled the zipper closed. The sound was crisp, final in a quiet, satisfying way. I carried it to the door and set it beside the first one. 2 bags now, 2 chapters closed. I stood there, looking at them in the dim light, and felt a calmness settle into my bones. A calmness born not from resignation, but from resolve. My life had been too small for too long, shaped by the ease of letting things slide. I wasn't angry with Claire. I wasn't even angry with myself. I was simply done pretending. I walked back into the bedroom and paused at the doorway, taking in the half-emptied closet, the cleared floor, the quiet that felt different tonight. Not hollow, not heavy, just honest. A chapter had shifted, and I could feel the difference in the way my shoulders rested, in the way my breath moved through my chest without catching. I turned off the light and stood for a moment in the darkness, letting the new truth settle. I wasn't just letting go of old clothes. I was letting go of the version of myself who accepted less because she was afraid to ask for more. And that version, finally, was ready to be folded away too. The next morning, the sky was pale and soft, the kind of muted blue that makes everything feel a little gentler than it is. I loaded the bags into the trunk of my car, each one landing with a quiet thud that echoed more in my chest than in the driveway. The drive to the local donation center was short, but felt momentous in a way I didn't say out loud. When I parked, I took a deep breath before carrying the first bag inside. The automatic doors slid open slowly, letting out a rush of warm air that smelled faintly of dust and detergent. A volunteer sorting books looked up and smiled at me. Neutral, welcoming, nothing complicated. It was the kind of smile that didn't expect anything in return. I placed the bag on the counter. A young woman with a ponytail stepped forward. "Donating today?" she asked, cheerful but not intrusive. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than expected. "Quite a bit." She glanced at the size and raised her eyebrows. "We can use it, thank you." Her gratitude was simple, clean, honest in a way I wasn't used to receiving. I nodded and went back to the car for the second bag. When I returned, the volunteer helped lift it with a small grunt, laughing softly. "You're doing spring cleaning early," she teased. "Something like that," I replied, feeling a strange looseness in my chest. Inside the center, people moved with gentle purpose, sorting, folding, organizing. No one looked at the clothes as cast-offs. They looked at them like possibilities. I glanced at a shelf stocked with neatly folded shirts. Nothing fancy, nothing perfect, but everything treated with a level of care I hadn't seen in years. I filled out the donation form on the counter, my hand trembling slightly as I signed my name. It wasn't nerves. It was release. The kind that comes when you stop carrying something that was never yours to hold in the first place. The volunteer stamped the form and handed me a copy. "Have a good day," she said. It felt like a blessing. As I walked toward the exit, I paused to watch a volunteer carefully refold one of the sweaters I had dropped off. She smoothed the sleeves, aligned the edges, and stacked it neatly with the others. The small act hit me harder than I expected. Someone else saw value in what had only ever been handed to me as an afterthought. Someone treated it with more respect in 5 seconds than Claire had in 5 years. I stood there a moment longer, letting the weight of that settle, feeling it shift something inside me, something that had been tight for too long. I stepped outside, the morning light bright but not harsh. The air carried the faint scent of cut grass from a nearby lawn. A breeze moved through the parking lot, tugging lightly at my shirt. And for the first time in a long while, the world didn't feel like it expected me to shrink into it. I walked to my car slowly, savoring the stillness inside myself. The empty trunk felt symbolic in a way I didn't need to name, an absence that finally made sense. I closed it gently, like closing the cover of a book I was finally done reading. When I slid into the driver's seat, I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there, with my hands resting loosely on the wheel, letting the moment anchor itself. There was no dramatic swell of emotion, just a steady, grounding calm, like the click of a puzzle piece finally finding its place. For the first time, I didn't wonder how Claire would react or what my brother would think. This choice was mine alone. I looked at the donation form beside me, then at the quiet road ahead. And for once, forward didn't feel frightening. It felt earned. I had just set the donation receipt on the passenger seat when a voice called out behind me. "Excuse me, are those your bags?" I turned to see a young volunteer wheeling a cart stacked with the clothes I'd dropped off. She looked no older than 20, her eyes bright with that particular kind of hopefulness people still carry before life has sharpened them. "Yes," I said, stepping closer. She grinned and held up one of the sweaters. "These will help a lot of families, especially new moms. We get so many who come in with almost nothing." Her words hit me unexpectedly, soft but deep. Something that had weighed me down for years was, to someone else, a small relief. That truth settled warmly in my chest. As she sorted through the pieces, her face lit up at a simple cotton dress, one I'd barely looked at twice. "Things like this go fast," she said, folding it with a care I hadn't given it myself. "People love getting something clean and comfortable." I watched her movements, each one gentle, deliberate. It struck me then how value shifts depending on where something is placed, and in whose hands. What felt like a burden to me could be a gift somewhere else. The thought unraveled a small knot inside me, making room for something lighter. Not justification, just perspective. I reached out, steadying one of the bags as she loaded it onto the cart. "I'm glad they'll help," I said quietly. She looked at me with an expression that held no assumptions, no judgments, just simple gratitude. "You'd be surprised how much difference even one bag makes," she said. "Some people walk in here overwhelmed, and just having something, anything, makes them feel seen." Seen. The word echoed through me, unsettling in the gentlest way. I wondered how long it had been since I'd felt that without condition or expectation. Standing there in the parking lot, I felt a humbling mix of pride and humility settle into place. The volunteer wheeled the cart away, but I stayed where I was for a moment, watching through the glass as she and another worker moved the clothes into sorting bins. They handled each item like it mattered, lifting, folding, placing. No one made comments. No one smirked. No one treated the clothes as symbols of someone else's inadequacy. The simple care they showed softened something that had been rigid inside me. It didn't erase the hurt, but it reframed it. What Claire saw as scraps, someone else saw as a start. A breeze rustled the trees by the sidewalk, sending a few leaves tumbling across the pavement. I let the moment wash over me, breathing in deeply. For the first time in years, the weight I carried wasn't shame. It was release. I stepped back toward the car, feeling taller somehow. Not because anyone had lifted me, but because I had finally stopped lowering myself. The parking lot glowed in the late morning sun, everything sharp and clear. It felt like stepping into a life I'd forgotten I was allowed to want. As I reached for the car door, I glanced back at the donation center one last time. Inside, the volunteers were still sorting, still smiling, still treating every thread with intention. I let the image settle in my mind, a reminder that what matters isn't what someone gives you, but the meaning you allow it to carry. The door closed with a soft thud, familiar, yet transformed by everything I had just felt. I sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, letting the quiet expand in me like a deep breath finally exhaled. It wasn't just the clothes that had found a better home. It was a part of me, too. The drive home felt strangely weightless. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need the distraction. The silence inside the car wasn't empty. It was clean, like fresh air after a long rain. When I saw a small cafe off the main road, I pulled in without thinking, the kind of impulse I rarely indulged. Inside, the place smelled of roasted espresso and old wood. A bell chimed gently behind me as I entered. I ordered a single shot of espresso, sharp, simple, mine, and waited while the barista tamped the grounds with slow, practiced care. It felt grounding to choose something entirely for myself, no strings attached. As I stepped back toward the door, an older man held it open for me. He wore a cap pulled low and carried a newspaper tucked under one arm. "Long day?" he asked with a kind smile. I let out a small laugh. "Long enough." He nodded knowingly. "You look lighter now," he said, though he couldn't possibly know why. Still, the words warmed something in me that had been cold for a long time. "Thank you," I replied, and I meant it. Sometimes strangers see us in ways the people closest to us never do. He tipped his head, and I stepped out into the sunlight feeling oddly buoyant. The bell above the door chimed again as I left, its soft ring blending with the hum of passing cars. I took a slow sip of the espresso, bitter, bright, alive, and let it settle warmly on my tongue. Standing there on the sidewalk, I looked around at the small strip of shops, the cracked pavement, the fading paint on the cafe sign. It wasn't beautiful, but something about it felt right. Ordinary places have a way of offering refuge when you need it most. For a moment, I let myself savor the feeling, this gentle, unexpected lightness curling quietly through my chest. Walking back to my car, I noticed how the sunlight bounced off the hood in soft flashes. I paused before opening the door, letting the warmth soak into my palms. A week ago, even a small pause like this would have felt indulgent. Now it felt necessary. I thought about the bags at the donation center, about the volunteers who handled them without judgment, about the young girl who saw value where I hadn't. Their kindness had settled over me like a thin, steady warmth, something I hadn't known I needed until it was offered freely. I breathed deeply, letting the air expand inside me without resistance. When I finally drove off, I didn't rush. The road stretched ahead in a quiet, forgiving line, and for once, I didn't feel the need to fill the space with plans or worries. I rolled the window down, letting the breeze slip across my face. The world looked the same houses, same trees, same cracked sidewalks, but I didn't feel the same moving through it. I felt recalibrated, like a compass that had finally found north after spinning too long. The espresso cup warmed my hand as I held it lightly, the taste still sharp on my tongue, a reminder that choosing for myself didn't require permission. By the time I reached home, the sky had deepened into late afternoon. Shadows stretched long across the yard, soft and unthreatening. I stood on the porch for a moment before unlocking the door, letting the quiet settle around me. Inside, the house felt familiar but changed, like it was waiting for whatever I would decide next, without expectation. I set the empty cup on the counter and inhaled slowly. Today hadn't been dramatic, but it had been decisive. A small, steady step toward a version of myself I hadn't let breathe in a long time. And I wasn't planning on shrinking her again. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my phone in front of me, the screen dark and reflective like a small, waiting mirror. I scrolled through the photos I'd taken, bags lined up at the donation center, the receipt stamped with the date. My thumb hovered over the share button more than once. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I wasn't trying to start a fight. I was just trying to honor the part of me that had finally spoken up. I opened a blank post, typed a few words, deleted them, then typed again. Nothing felt quite right, not harsh, not soft, not honest enough. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the phone screen. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator behind me, the steady rhythm oddly comforting. I tried again. Thank you for everything, but I'm done taking what I don't need. I erased it, two-pointed. Then, I'm learning what fits me and what doesn't. Better, but still not true enough. I sighed and set the phone down, rubbing my temples. Some boundaries aren't loud. Some are gentle, deliberate, and meant only to protect the space you're reclaiming. I opened the Notes app instead. A new sentence formed slowly beneath my fingertips. I appreciate the thought, but I won't be accepting used clothes anymore. I read it once, then again. The words felt steady, balanced. Not an accusation, just a truth. I let myself sit with it, letting the clarity settle into my bones. My chest felt strangely warm, as if some invisible thread that had been pulling tight finally loosened. This wasn't about the clothes. It was about my voice, quiet, but finally mine. I set the phone aside and watched the glow from my table lamp soften the room. The golden light pooled across my hands as I folded them on the table, tracing the warmth along my skin. For years, I'd swallowed discomfort to keep the peace, pretending it cost nothing. But tonight, peace looked different. It looked like truth spoken softly. I typed the message again, this time in the chat window meant for Claire. Thank you, but I won't be taking more clothes. I have enough. I didn't hit send, not yet. I wanted to send it from a place of calm, not from the remnants of hurt. The longer I sat there, the clearer the boundary became. Not a wall, not a threat, but a line drawn with the steadiness of someone finally choosing herself. My lamp flickered slightly, casting a warm glow over the kitchen. The quiet settled into something almost gentle. I picked up the phone and reread what I'd written. Simple. True. Enough. My finger hovered over the send button again, but I waited, letting the moment breathe with me. This wasn't a message fueled by emotion. It was a declaration shaped by clarity. When I finally closed the app, I didn't delete the message. I left it there, unsent, but alive in its own way, ready for the moment I felt fully steady. I stood, turning off the kitchen light, letting the room fall into a quiet that no longer felt heavy. Tonight wasn't about confrontation. It was about preparation, a gathering of strength, a soft rehearsal for the line I was ready to draw. As I walked toward my bedroom, the silence followed me like a faithful shadow. I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I was learning to fill it with my own voice. The next afternoon, I took the dog for a walk around the cul-de-sac. The sky was a washed-out blue, the kind that made everything look slightly softer than it felt. My dog trotted ahead with easy confidence, occasionally sniffing at mailboxes as if he had important decisions to make. I tucked my hands into my jacket pockets, letting the steady rhythm of our footsteps settle my thoughts. The neighborhood was calm, just the sound of a distant lawnmower and the occasional rustle of leaves skipping across the pavement. I replayed the draft message in my mind, the words still sitting quietly on my screen at home. I knew I would send it. I just wanted to be sure I was doing it for the right reasons, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. As we rounded the corner, I thought of my brother, of how he'd sounded on the phone lately, tired, stretched thin, trying to juggle more than he admitted. Part of me worried he'd feel stuck in the middle. Part of me wondered if he already sensed the line forming between Claire and me, even before a single word was exchanged. Family dynamics rarely broke cleanly. They frayed like fabric left in the sun too long. Still, I knew I couldn't keep absorbing what wasn't mine to carry. Protecting someone else's comfort shouldn't come at the cost of erasing myself. That truth pulsed quietly inside me with each step. A girl on a bike zoomed past us, her ponytail bouncing like a small flag in the wind. "Hi," she chirped, before disappearing down the street. Her simple confidence, so unbothered, so unfiltered, made me smile. It reminded me of who I used to be, before years of soft compliance had dulled my edges. I straightened my shoulders, letting that memory settle into my posture. I wasn't trying to be confrontational. I just wanted to reclaim the parts of myself I had misplaced while trying to be agreeable. The thought wasn't painful, it was clarifying. We reached the end of the cul-de-sac where the leaves had gathered in a rust-colored pile along the curb. My dog paused to sniff them, burying his nose deep into the crunch. I stood still, letting the breeze brush my face. "I'm not doing anything wrong," I whispered. The words floated out of me softly, almost like a confession, except there was nothing to confess. I wasn't attacking anyone. I wasn't dramatic. I was simply choosing to stop letting small cuts accumulate in silence. The wind carried the words away, but their weight stayed anchored somewhere steady inside me. As we headed back toward the house, the late afternoon sun stretched our shadows long along the sidewalk. Mine looked taller than I felt. Steady, upright, somehow sure. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't check it. Not yet. I knew what mattered wasn't someone else's reaction. It was my readiness to speak plainly. I breathed deeply, tasting the coolness of the air, letting it steady the last traces of doubt lingering in my chest. For once, I didn't feel rushed. The boundary was already forming inside me, and it didn't need to be loud to be real. When we reached my door, I wiped my shoes on the mat and stepped inside. The house felt still, warm, expectant. I walked straight to the table where my phone sat waiting, the draft message glowing faintly against the dim kitchen light. I didn't open it yet. Not out of hesitation, just intention. I wanted to send it from the version of myself who had walked the cul-de-sac today. Calm, grounded, certain. I exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle over me like a soft curtain lowering. Then I sat down, ready for whatever came next. Not as someone grateful for scraps, but as someone finally ready to choose herself. When I finally sat down at the kitchen table, the room felt still in a way that invited honesty. My phone sat beside my elbow, the draft message waiting like a steady heartbeat. I opened it once more, reading the single sentence I had written. I won't be taking any more clothes. Thank you, but I'm choosing differently now. It was simple, unadorned. It didn't accuse, it didn't apologize. It just told the truth. My thumb hovered for a breath, and then I hit post. Not a text to Claire, but a quiet picture on my social page. 6 bags lined up at the donation center. Caption: giving things to places where they can be used. No names, no shade, just clarity. I tagged Claire, not out of spite, but out of transparency. Out of the desire to let the story land where it needed to, without softening it for someone else's comfort. The moment I pressed share, my heart thudded once, clean and sharp. I didn't wait for comments. I didn't wait for reactions. I set the phone down gently and leaned back in the chair, letting the silence expand. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't rebellion. It was reclamation. A quiet, steady boundary drawn without raising my voice or bending myself out of shape. My breath moved lightly, almost relieved. The bags at the center weren't a secret. They were a decision. A small, firm pivot back toward myself. I glanced at the window, noticing how the evening light had softened into a gold that didn't feel harsh or accusatory. It felt closing, like a chapter settling into place. My phone buzzed once, but I didn't reach for it. Not yet. Instead, I rested my hands on the table, palms flat, as if grounding myself in the very quiet I had earned. Eventually, curiosity tugged at me. I picked up the phone. A message from Claire popped up on the screen almost immediately. "Are you trying to embarrass me?" The words were sharp, clipped, peppered with dots as if she'd typed them fast enough to shake. I read the message twice, then set the phone down again. Her reaction wasn't surprising. Her discomfort wasn't mine to carry. What surprised me was the absence of guilt in my chest. The space where guilt used to live now felt wide, still, steady. My phone buzzed again, a longer message this time, full of explanations and defensiveness, and fragments of sentences trying to climb over each other. I didn't respond. Instead, I observed the feeling that rose inside me. Not fear, not regret, just certainty. Boundaries often look like betrayal to people who benefited from your lack of them. But I wasn't shrinking this time. I let her messages sit unread a little longer, giving myself the grace of a pause. The last light of the day slipped into the room, brushing gently across the floor. I felt it touch my arm, soft and warm, like a quiet hand resting without pressure. My phone lay face down again, silent now. For the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel like something happening to me. It felt like something I had chosen. I inhaled slowly, steadying myself for whatever might come next, and let the quiet wrap around me, not as a shield, but as a kind of freedom. What I'd done wasn't loud, but it was enough. And enough, finally, was mine to claim. Claire's first message was sharp, but the second came faster, longer, rattled, trying to stitch control back together with rushed punctuation. "I can't believe you'd post something like that. People will think I don't care about you." I stared at the words glowing on my screen. Care. The word sat strangely now, mismatched with everything it was meant to defend. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt detached, as if her urgency belonged to another room, another life. I placed the phone on the table and folded my hands in my lap, waiting for the next wave to pass without letting it pull me under. A third message arrived, full of half-formed accusations and half-hearted justifications. I was just trying to help. You could have said something. You didn't have to make a show out of it. I breathed slowly, letting the quiet inside my chest answer for me. There had been no show, no spectacle, just a picture of 6 bags that no longer belonged in my home, and a caption that harmed no one. If the truth shook her, it was because she'd never expected it to stand on its own. I let the phone rest face down again, choosing stillness over reaction. The heater hummed softly in the background, its steady warmth filling the room with a kind of domestic calm that contrasted sharply with the messages arriving in bursts. For years I had absorbed moments like this, other people's discomfort, other people's defensiveness, folding myself around them like fabric. Not tonight. Tonight my shoulders stayed level, my breath stayed smooth. Her reaction no longer felt like something I needed to fix or soften or translate. It belonged to her, and for the first time, I let her keep it. When I picked up the phone again, it was only to read, not to respond. Her final message was shorter, the tone clipped. So, what exactly are you trying to say? The question held more fear than aggression. It surprised me a little, that small tremor beneath her words. But I didn't rush to comfort it. I didn't try to reshape my truth into something softer. Some understanding isn't mine to deliver. Some reckonings belong entirely to the person who feels shaken by them. I typed slowly, letting the words come from the calmest part of me. I'm not trying to say anything publicly. I just gave away things I wasn't using. That's all. I didn't send it yet. I reread it to make sure it carried no bitterness, no hidden blade, only truth. This wasn't about defending myself. It wasn't about justifying anything. It was about setting a boundary in a voice that didn't tremble anymore. I placed the phone on the table and let the moment breathe before pressing send. When the message finally went through, I felt no jolt, no adrenaline, just a slow exhale, like something long overdue had finally settled into place. The heater clicked off. The room fell into a soft quiet, warm but spacious. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch without filling it with worry. Whatever Claire felt now was hers. Whatever came next would unfold as it needed to. But one thing was certain. I wasn't bending myself small to make space for anyone's discomfort ever again. The truth didn't need to be loud to be real. It just needed to be mine. I didn't have to wait long for Claire's reply. The typing bubbles appeared, disappeared, then returned again like she was wrestling each word before releasing it. Finally, a short message arrived. I don't understand. You always took them before. I stared at the line, feeling no sting, just a quiet recognition of the truth she hadn't meant to reveal. I typed back slowly, letting the words settle into shape without anger, without apology. I appreciated the thought, but I'm not accepting used clothes anymore. I sent it before I could overthink it. The message felt like stepping into a room with the lights finally on. Her response didn't come for 15 minutes, long enough for the kettle to boil and for me to wrap my hands around a warm mug. When her message finally arrived, it was just 3 words. What do you mean? I set the phone down gently, feeling an unexpected softness rise in my chest. She truly didn't understand. Not the boundary, not the history, not the quiet harm wrapped in years of help. I typed again, steady. It means I'm choosing what feels right for me now. That's all. Truth doesn't need decoration. It just asks for enough space to breathe. A long pause followed. Then another message appeared, this one edged with confusion instead of accusation. So, is this about me? I closed my eyes, letting out a slow breath. The easy answer was yes. But the truth was bigger than a single person. It was about every moment I'd accepted less than I needed, every time I'd shrunk myself to make room for someone else's comfort. I typed, deliberate and gentle. It's not about blaming anyone. I'm just setting a boundary for myself. My thumb hovered for a moment. Then I sent it. Soft doesn't mean weak. For a while there was nothing, just the faint hum of my heater and the quiet sound of my own breathing. Then the phone buzzed with a call. My brother. I answered on the third ring. "Hey," he said, voice lower than usual. "Claire's upset. Said you're mad at her." I stared at the steam rising from my mug. "I'm not mad," I said softly. "I'm just done taking things that don't feel like gifts." He was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear him sorting through years of dynamics, expectations, and unspoken truths. "You okay?" he finally asked, voice gentler. "I am," I said. And I meant it. We talked for a few minutes, careful, quiet, two adults navigating a family thread that had frayed without us noticing. He didn't defend Claire. He didn't blame me. He just listened. That alone felt like its own small mercy. "I'll talk to her," he said eventually. "But I'm proud of you." The words landed softly, unexpected and warming in a way I didn't know I needed. "Thank you," I whispered. When we hung up, I sat there for a moment, letting his kindness settle into the space Claire's defensiveness had shaken. The house felt different after the call, still, but not heavy. I exhaled slowly, feeling something inside me unclench, like a knot gently loosening after years of holding too tightly. I set my phone down and rested my arms on the table, letting the quiet expand without swallowing me. Tonight wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about naming the truth with a steady voice and letting the world adjust around it. Outside, the street was calm. Inside, I felt a steadiness I hadn't known in a long time. Soft, grounded, entirely my own. Thai morning, I woke earlier than usual. Light seeped quietly through the curtains, brushing a soft line across the floor. The house felt still, but not the kind of stillness that presses on your chest. More like the pause after a long, steady exhale. I walked to the closet, pulled the doors open, and looked at the space I had created. Clean, uncluttered, mine. My fingers skimmed the empty hangers, the shelves wiped bare of years I hadn't truly chosen. It didn't feel lonely. It felt honest, like a room finally allowed to match the person who lived in it. For the first time, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. My phone buzzed with a final message from Claire. "I guess I didn't realize it bothered you. I'll stop giving you clothes." No apology, but no accusation either. Just a quiet step back. Small, but real. I read it twice, feeling an unexpected flicker of relief. Boundaries don't always end with understanding. Sometimes they simply shift the air enough for clarity to settle. I typed a simple reply. "Thank you." No explanations, no justification, just acknowledgement. I set the phone down, letting the moment land gently instead of sharply. Later, I opened the window and let the cool air sweep into the room, lifting the curtains in soft, slow waves. I stood there with my hands resting on the sill, watching a neighbor walk their dog, listening to the faint murmur of a lawn sprinkler 2 houses down. Ordinary sounds, comforting ones. For so long, I had let small hurts carve deeper lines than they deserved. But now, the quiet didn't feel like a place I fell into. It felt like a place I chose. A place where my breath wasn't competing with anyone else's expectations. I spent the afternoon reorganizing the rest of the house, not out of frustration, but out of intention. A drawer here, a shelf there, clearing space that had long been claimed by things I didn't actually use or want. Each small act of sorting felt like stitching myself back together, thread by thread. I wasn't trying to erase the past. I was simply making room for a life that fit me better. By the time I stepped back, the rooms looked nearly unchanged to anyone else. But I saw the difference, in the way the air moved, in the way my shoulders dropped when I walked through the doorway. Near sunset, my brother called again. We talked about mundane things, dinner plans, weekend errands, a movie he'd watched and half forgotten. But beneath his voice was something softer, understanding, alignment. A quiet reassurance that our relationship didn't hinge on my compliance. Before hanging up, he said, "I'm glad you're doing what feels right for you." It wasn't dramatic, but it was exactly what I needed. A reminder that family doesn't collapse when you choose yourself. Sometimes it just learns to stand in a new shape. That night, I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, looking at the space I had reclaimed, physically, emotionally, quietly. No grand declarations, no dramatic endings, just a steady, grounded knowing that I had walked out of a version of myself that had grown too small. I turned off the light and let the darkness settle softly across the room. In the quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A sense of possibility. The kind that doesn't need an audience or approval. The kind that comes when you finally choose your own voice, even if it speaks in a whisper. And for the first time, the whisper was enough. In the end, nothing erupted. No screaming, no slammed doors, no dramatic unraveling of family ties. Just a single sentence, spoken calmly, that quietly redrew the shape of my life. I didn't need applause. I didn't need anyone to agree. I only needed the space to honor the part of me that had gone unheard for too long. When I closed my closet door that final night, it wasn't just about clothes. It was the sound of reclaiming something I had slowly given away piece by piece. My right to choose what belonged in my life and what didn't. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt like the beginning of a room finally built to my size. Maybe that's how real change happens, not with fireworks, but with a whispered decision that grows roots. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever had to stand quietly but firmly for yourself, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experience in the comments. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you want more stories like this, gentle, raw, and true, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories find the people who need them most.